Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Today's guest is Kristin Zhivago of Zhivago Partners and author of the book Roadmap to Revenue. And Kristin is an expert in the whole B2B buying process. And we're going to talk about the buyer's mindset and how buyers set the pace, actually are the ones that are driving how sales happen, and how we have to be in tune with that in order to adjust our sales and marketing efforts to really listen to what the buyers really want and then give them what they really want to actually grow sales. So let's listen as Kristin joins our podcast. Well, welcome, Kristin, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, Kristin, for our audience sake, and because there's so much depth and breadth to what you do, if you could just describe briefly the primary audience you serve and what do you mostly do for them?
We are a digital marketing management company, which you could say is a digital agency, but we do a lot more than that because I've been a revenue coach for decades. And so I don't just say, oh, yes, use this channel or do this digital thing. We also really make sure the strategy is on target and they're making it easy for their customers to buy, which is something I've been teaching CEOs and entrepreneurs to do for a long time. Mostly B2B companies, but a mixture of B2B and B2C.
Okay. And mostly, is it like smaller or mid-market businesses?
Definitely mid-market, definitely companies that are, say, 2 million to 50 million.
Okay. All right. So these are established companies.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Right. They're not your startups. And so, which is
no. I've had, I spent decades in Silicon Valley. I've had enough startups.
Okay. All right. So it's good to see there's some ongoing business as you step in.
Yeah.
Well, Kristin, one thing that I wanted to really dig in with you is I think it's a really interesting topic, broadly speaking, is things are changing. And you said something even as your part of your self-introduction, which is teaching people how buyers buy, or I may not have done justice to the exact phrasing there, but that idea that buyers are now more in the leadership position, so to speak, about the buying process. And maybe they've always been, but it's so much sales literature, marketing literature is how we're going to persuade, how we're going to drive revenue and things like that. So could you just comment a little bit of like what's changed in the last 10 years, the last 5? Is it the last, since the 2000s? I mean, when does this change happen and what should be expected? If I'm an owner listening to this, what should I start getting ready for?
Well, the big change, of course, was 1994 when the web went commercial. And since then, the buyers have been equipped with massive tools at their fingertips. They can search competitors, they can look at reviews, they can talk to other customers, they can reach out to their network and LinkedIn and say, I'm looking for this. What do you think? What's been your experience? They are absolutely and totally in complete control of the buying process. And the sellers haven't supported that. I mean, even when you go to Amazon, which sets the record for making it easy for people to buy, or sets the standard, very often you have a simple question like a physical object, and there's no measurements in the description. It's like, come on, guys, I have questions. So I have to say one thing that I've, in addition to teaching people how to make it easy for customers to buy, the thing that really struck me the last couple of years is that you have to pay attention to something I call their mindset when they set out to buy. That's more important than their persona. It's more important than anything else about them. It's a series. It's 3 things. It's their desires, their concerns, and their questions when they set out to buy. If you don't address those 3 things on your site and in all of your channels, your social marketing, everything you're doing, they're just going to click away. And that's what they do. They click away and just go to the next guy. So you really have to be able to present that in seconds when they come to your site. And they have to recognize that you know what their desires, concerns, and questions are. And if you guess, the thing that hasn't changed in all these years I've been doing this work is if you guess, you lose. If you think you know, you lose. So you have to interview them. I spell it out in my book, Roadmap to Revenue. Here's exactly how you get your customers on the phone, and then you reverse engineer a successful sale so that you can make new sales in quantity. And in doing that, by the way, you unite sales and marketing, because I know we were thinking about talking about that today. If everybody is united on the customer's mindset, then all of the political, subjective, terrible craziness goes away.
Hey, pardon the interruption. It'll just be a beat. We want to tell you about something that's really exciting, and it might be very exciting to you if you're the owner, CEO, leader of a B2B company, roughly with $2 to $20 million in revenue, and you feel a little bit stuck. You know what I mean? Sales are a little flat, maybe even declining, challenged. Margins are being squeezed. Sales cycles seem to be lengthening, and lead flow is uncertain. We've designed a program based on over a dozen years of us doing exactly this for many B2B companies. It's called the Competitive Edge Program. And you can learn more about it at valueprop.com/edge. Tells you all about the program. It's a 90-day program, really focused on helping you sharpen your value proposition, aligning your value delivery, making sure your marketing program is doing what it has to do if you're in B2B, which is generate opportunities, and make sure your sales process is tight so that you can convert those opportunities into sales. So with that note, let's get back to an exciting episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. The terrible craziness. Yeah, because it literally makes no sense, since at the end of the day, the prize is the same for whether you're a marketing discipline person or a sales discipline person.
That's right.
To make
Revenue.
a sale happen, right? So like at some point, that's the only measure of success that really matters.
That's right.
But something you said, I think is really fascinating, which is you said you reverse engineer a sale.
Mhm.
I'd like to dig in on that a little bit, because I think that could be very useful, that idea. Because we don't normally think that way. We think from, okay, here's where I start. Here's the top, the classic top of the funnel. This is where I send them 8,000 white papers, and then I do the demo or whatever. So describe for me a little bit, or for our audience, a little bit how they can approach, if they hear that phrase, if it attracts them the way it attracted me, like, how would I reverse engineer a sale? What are some simple steps maybe they could take to even attempt it?
Well, the thing that I learned working with engineers for years in Silicon Valley, I married one too, is that there really is a logical process to just about everything. And selling and marketing is no exception. If you treat it like some creative thing where you just put something out there and see what happens, you're missing the whole point. There is a buying process. They do have a set of questions, and the questions are usually in some kind of order. And by the way, they don't ask the salespeople those questions all the time. In fact, when you say, oh, I don't have to worry about doing customer research because my salespeople are talking to customers all the time. And this is very true in B2B, by the way. The problem is, and when I hear a CEO say this, I just look at him and say, when was the last time you told a salesperson the truth? When you were being sold to.
When you're on the other side of that.
Yeah.
Right?
When did you tell them what you were really thinking? And they go, oh, okay. All right. So when you're buying, you're playing poker. You're getting information, but you're not revealing as much. You're kind of holding your cards close to your chest. So the buyer, or the seller, the salesperson, doesn't really hear all of the desires, concerns, and questions that the customers have. And what was making them want the product and choosing you over everybody else, that is the most important thing you can know. And I started doing customer interviews before I would even start working with a client as a revenue coach, because every single time I went to a company and started working with them, I'd say, what's important to your customers? And they'd have a list, 10 things. And the thing at the top was the thing usually that was the hardest for them to create, whatever it was. Then I'd go out and I'd interview the customers, and they'd have a list, and it was never the same list. Okay, never. Maybe a few items in common, but the order was always different. And there was something at the top of the list that the client just said, oh, you're kidding. They care about that. That's the thing that, wow, okay. And I've turned whole companies around with this one concept, that if you get that list right and everybody in your management team and your sales team and your marketing team, they understand what that list is and what order it is, then you're all on the same path and you can all start selling the right way and marketing the right way. And everything you do will be in sync with the customer's buying process. That's how you win.
Now it's interesting, Kristin, because I've seen owners, and just in my client base over the last 10 plus years, doing this as value prop, who almost want to argue with the customer what that priority should be. It's almost like, well, if only these customers would see X as the main thing, then they pick us every time.
Yeah.
So how I'm just curious, that process does it sometimes run into a little bit like,
oh, sure,
let's have some real talk about this?
Yes, but then there's another simple thing I say in that case. If somebody's standing at your door with money in their hand, you should open the door and let them in. You shouldn't say, oh, we don't like to sell that. We know better than you. You don't need that. You need this other thing. You shouldn't ever have to persuade anybody to do anything.
That's a great, by the way, that's a dynamite quote. You shouldn't have to persuade anybody to do anything.
Because they want to buy.
Right.
People forget that everybody goes to work so they can buy stuff. That's why they go to work, so they can buy stuff and take care of their families and everything. They have needs. Mm-hmm. And if you're there when they have the need with good search engine marketing and all that stuff you have to do to be there when they have the need, then, and you answer those, you address those desires, concerns, and questions, they're not going to click away. They're going to stick with you and buy from you. It's very simple, but your ego gets in the way. The ego is the enemy. I know better than them. Well, it doesn't matter if you're smarter than them because they have the money that you want.
Wow. So what about when you're introducing a new service that you think is a really good idea that may be a little bit ahead of the market, where there is a necessary education? I think about like Salesforce introducing cloud-based CRM, and CRM was only like a thing for like 5 years at that point in time when they introduced cloud-based CRM.
Right.
So at some point, the customer doesn't even know this thing exists. So how does that change in this equation?
The only thing that changes is you have to interview people who might be customers versus people who have already bought from you. It's the only difference.
Okay.
Everything else is the same. The questions you ask, and by the way, in my book, I reveal every single thing I've learned about how to get people on the phone. And by the way, you don't do it in person and you don't do it online with the survey and stuff. That's just you regurgitating what you know and asking them questions. It's a conversation that you have with a customer on the phone. So there's no physical body language stuff and nothing to distract, and they can be wherever they want and talk to you. For about a half an hour, you ask open-ended questions. What did you think of our product or service? Why did you buy from us? What trends do you see in the market? If you were the CEO of this company tomorrow, what's the first thing you would focus on or fix so that you find out what you're doing wrong? If you went to Google and looked for this, what would you type in? These are the questions. And I have them in my book. You ask those questions. And what's really fascinating to me about this process is that it only takes 5 to 7 interviews of a given type of person. Like if you're selling to a top executive and then a mid-tier person, you'd want to interview both types. It only takes 5 to 7 interviews before you start to see a trend and you see the pattern and the big picture bubbles up. And now you've got your strategy. It's just shocking how effective this is. You're basically finding out what they want and then figuring out how to give it to them. It's just that simple.
Everybody must be doing this, but they're not. So why isn't everybody doing something that seems, when you lay it out like that, Kristin, candidly, it sounds like who could argue with this? Right? Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to do this? Yet I'm sure you've run into many situations where people just somehow either resist it, or it's not what they're used to, or it's not their approach. They want to do a quantitative survey of 1,000 likely buyers, and they buy a big list, and they're doing Qualtrics or whatever, and they're trying to do something big and very expensive. And you're saying, no, have 7 conversations, you'll get to the same place. Right. You might even get to a better place.
Yes, of course you will. It's ego. It's fear and ego. So it's being afraid of somebody knowing more than you. So there's an essence, there's an aspect of this which is about humility. But that should be there anyway. Your customers are the ones with the money, and you need the money to run your business. And so you should be humble about what they want and do everything you can to try to give it to them. It's very simple. If you think you're smarter than them and they can't teach you anything because you've been in the business for 50 years and you know better than them, well, okay, then you're going to restrict your own success. Period. End of story. You're your own worst enemy.
Now, what's interesting is I've seen and observed, being in the knowledge business, right? We're both in the knowledge business. A lot of people sell knowledge products, do a lot of what I call mystery marketing. Everything, long form copy that just it's you're never quite sure, like, okay, what is it? And how much does it cost?
Yeah.
And apparently it's successful at some level for certain kind of, what I call the guru sphere and so on.
Yeah.
But people selling like B2B products, services, and so on, I think that just irritates customers.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Why not just be upfront? Like, if the price is the price, or the service, these are the services, why not
just tell me?
describe it? Just tell you. Right?
Yeah. So I should mention that in my book, I map out 4 types of sales.
Okay.
Low scrutiny, medium scrutiny, heavy scrutiny, and intense scrutiny. Low scrutiny is see it, buy it, impulse purchase. Medium scrutiny is things like clothing or simple software programs. See it, ask a few questions, buy it. Nobody else is involved typically. Heavy scrutiny as a salesperson, a contract, somebody else is involved in the sale. It's long and drawn out. Okay. And then intense scrutiny is all of that, plus you get married. It's a long-term relationship, right? So in the book, I spend about half the book actually mapping out those buying processes and the types of questions that people buy. And even if you never talk to a customer, first of all, you would know right away which scrutiny scale level you fall on. You know if you sell a light, medium, heavy, or intense scrutiny product or service. But secondly, you would understand how this sales process should go. And sure, you talk about the funnel and all that, but it basically goes from the customer's perspective. Where was I when I started? What do you need to tell me in order to make a decision? And then what will make me buy? Okay. Selling is not persuading. Again, we'll go back to that. It's educating. It's telling them something they don't know, giving them answers to questions that they can't get anywhere else. If, by the way, you're selling a B2B service, which is one of the hardest things to sell, your sales and marketing should be so good that by the time they actually pick up the phone and come to you, which is way late in the process now, they should only have a few questions. When people come to hire me, they just want to know, they already have decided they want to hire me because they've listened to my stuff and I've educated them. They just want to know, how much does it cost? Do you want to take us on, and when can you start? That's it. Everything else is answered by everything else I've put out there. And that's how it should be. So you can actually take an intense scrutiny service, which is what I provide, and take it all the way down to almost the light or medium scrutiny kind of end decision, because you've done your part. You've answered those desires and concerns and questions.
So that sales call in that example is more, Tom Poland puts it this way: he says it should be to confirm, not to convince.
Correct.
So that's, at that point, they want to do business with you.
That's right.
But they may have
their money in their hand and they're ready to spend it.
Right. Now, what about, and many of our listeners, I think, might fall or see themselves falling more into a commodity category. They're like, let's say, in manufacturing, they're contract manufacturers. Many people could turn that metal, can harden it, can spline it, do all those different things. So they often find themselves selling to large corporations where they're working with procurement that went to buying school, right? So and they feel like, no matter how we try to differentiate ourselves to really add value, the people we're selling to don't care about any of that. They ask us, okay, yeah, that's nice, but what's your price?
Yes.
And unless you're the biggest buyer of resources, you can't be the low-cost provider. It's not.
No, that's right.
The physics of it is not sustainable.
I will say this: there is always, and this is based on interviewing thousands of customers for hundreds of companies, okay? There is always some value thing that you can provide to make it easy for you to do business with them. I can't tell you what it is. You have to find out, but there's always something. Now, one of the things in that situation about, whether you're a commodity or not, is realizing that in the corporate world, if you're selling to the corporation, the biggest fear is the fear of embarrassment. When I've done marketing and sales turnarounds for really, really, really big companies, IBM and so on, the first thing I noticed was when you first walk into the company, you get this little imaginary whiteboard hung on your neck, a little one. And every time you make a mistake, you get a black mark. They never get erased. Everybody always remembers them, never forgets them. And if you get too many black marks, after a while, you can say something in a meeting and no one will pay any attention to you. Okay, you're just dismissed. So that is the biggest fear. No black marks on my whiteboard. So if you start looking at what you're presenting to them and say, what are those black marks? What would embarrass them? What would make them really feel bad about going to their boss? Now, obviously, part of that is, hey, boss, I saved you a bunch of money. And so I'm not embarrassed because I did that. But there are plenty of things that make it easier for them to do business with you than with someone else. Do you pick up the phone? Does somebody actually answer the phone instead of going into voicemail hell? Do you return phone calls? Do you make it easy? You have your prices over. There's a million things. And again, you'd have to ask them. I can't tell you. You have to find out for yourself.
Right, because that's don't guess what they want.
Right.
Just talk to 5 or 7 of them and ask them what they want and what their desires are, what their concerns are, and what questions they might have.
That's right.
And if you answer that consistently, you become more desirable to them.
That's correct.
And in fact, especially in the commodity category, all things being equal, why would they pick A over B over C? It's going to be something other than price or other than just the sheer deliverability of the product. They assume that if you're in the business of selling whatever spindles, of course you could deliver spindles. That's not the issue.
That's right.
But what else is going on? And it's interesting you mentioned that because a lot of the mid-market B2B companies sell to large corporations.
Yes.
And they sometimes transfer their mindset as a buyer, where all money is personal in a privately held company. It just is. The owner.
That's right.
To a corporate citizen, it's not their money, but it is their job.
That's right. That's right.
So it's other issues other than just purely money's a big part of it, but it's not as simple. It doesn't work the same way.
Well, and how many times has a buyer said to the boss, they're a little bit more expensive, but it's worth it because blah, blah, blah.
So make that blah, blah, blah be strong.
Yeah.
So
that's your big thing. That's what you're going to sell.
That's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Well, now, so just to be clear, your book is Roadmap to Revenue?
Yes. Roadmap to Revenue, how to sell the way your customers want to buy. It's on Amazon.
Love it. Love the title. And based on just the things you've called out today, I can't imagine it wouldn't be an incredibly valuable addition to somebody's tool.
There's no fluff in that book. It's all absolute. Here, take it, put it to work.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Kristin, thank you. This has been a fantastic time together. Really got a lot out of just this 20-minute conversation here. If somebody wanted to know more about you and your work, where should they go?
Well, first of all, you can just Google me. If you type in Kristin Zhivago, I dominate multiple pages. But you can also go to zhivagopartners.com. That's our website, zhivagopartners.com. There's a blog there. There's a bunch of podcasts. It's a whole lot of information for people. I give away knowledge constantly, so they'll be helped.
Fantastic. Kristin, thank you so much for being with us today on the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. If you like this episode and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.